Hello and welcome to part 2 of our concert A Mother's Voice, which is based on the theme of motherhood. Once again, we'll be taking a look at music written by living composers and discovering how being a mother is reflected in contemporary music, but also scratching the surface at the composers' individual processes in how they made that music in the first place. Today we have music by Cheryl Frances-Hoad, Cecilia McDowall and Stephen McNeff, and some poetry by Melinda Kallesmae. Even though each of the pieces uses piano as accompaniment, they are each very different in their approaches to how they portray motherhood, which is why we included them, as we find that each is very interesting in their perspectives. As usual, there will be interviews with the composers and their website addresses will be available at the end if you'd like to find out more. Gavin and I were very lucky this time around that we were able to record the music together in the same room, obviously very safely, but we found it a very enjoyable experience after such a long time, and we hope that you will find it enjoyable too. Thank you very much. I have the pleasure of introducing composer Cecilia McDowall. Hello Cecilia, and thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this and for answering some questions. So your piece Song of the Mice is one of the 2 Ratushinskaya songs which you wrote for the contralto Mary Hamilton back in 1996. I just wondered, how did that initial commission come about?
Hello Donna, it's lovely to be a part of all of this. Oh right, my 2 Ratushinskaya songs were written for friends, for Mary Hamilton, lovely contralto, who sang with the Royal Opera House Chorus at the time, and for pianist Catherine Starrock, who founded the Fibonacci Sequence Chamber Ensemble. Then the director of the Prestine Festival, George Vass, suggested I rescore the songs for soprano and piano, and in 2002, Rachel Nichols, soprano, and pianist Simon Lepper performed them at the Prestine Festival.
So the text was written by poet Irina Ratushinskaya, hence the title 2 Ratushinskaya songs. But I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about her and also why you felt compelled to set her text to music.
Ah, yes, the text. My mother taught Russian, so there was always a great supply of Russian literature available in the family home. And quite simply, one day I was looking for a suitable text to set for Mary Hamilton, and I found a collection of poems called Pencil Letter by Irina Ratushinskaya. I was struck by both the delicacy and the power of these poems, and I found the background to them really quite shocking. Ratushinskaya was sent to a labour camp for 7 years for expressing anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda. She was aware of the danger of writing poems in prison, but she wrote them anyway, and she wrote them in tiny handwriting on scraps of paper which were smuggled out of the prison camp, and then much later they were gathered into a collection called Pencil Letter.
It's just fascinating, isn't it? So, but how do you approach the task of setting text to music? At the time of your first commission, Irina was still alive. Did you communicate at all about your songs?
That's a really interesting question, how one begins setting text to music. From a practical point of view, words, text or poems, they're just a great starting point. For instance, the structure is already in place, well, more or less, and then the words give the inspiration, the mood, they give everything. And whatever words I set, and I'm sure this will be the same for everybody, all composers, I don't want to get in the way of the words or the meaning. So it's important to me that the words stand out and they make a connection with the listener. And I would have loved to have been in touch with Irina Ratushinskaya while writing. She was such a remarkable woman and felt so passionately about what was going on around her, all through such astonishing hardship. For one of her 7 years, she was in solitary confinement in an unheated cell where the temperatures fell to minus 40 centigrade in winter.
She sounds like an absolutely incredible woman, and what a legacy to have her poetry live on in your music as well. For me, Song of the Mice, it feels like a lullaby on the edge, I suppose. It's a mother who's absolutely desperate to get her little one to sleep, even if she is a mouse. But, you know, the realities of being a mother are really laid bare. It's a mother who fears, a mother who's frustrated and tired, and using anything she can, any sort of tricks to get her little one to sleep. Were these the sorts of ideas that you were hoping to uncover in your music? Because for me, that's what I can certainly hear when I listen to it. And also, why do you think Arena used the imagery of a mouse rather than a human, for instance?
It's lovely to hear you say that about Song of the Mice, that it's a lullaby, but on the edge. In so many of Ratushinskaya's poems, there's a dark undertow, the inescapable, terrifying Soviet surveillance. The poet refers to the bogeyman, Soviet oppression, the KGB, but she tries to calm the little one into sleep. And I feel by Ratushinskaya using a mouse, it opens up the fragility and the powerlessness of the individual in the face of tyrannical suppression. And I suppose too, every mother wants to give hope and reassurance to her offspring, even while they are surrounded by extreme danger. So perhaps by writing about animals, the poet might have thought that if these poems were discovered, that the Soviet powers, KGB, might take them all at face value.
And thank goodness they didn't, otherwise we wouldn't have had the poetry that we have today, I guess. So my final question, something we've been asking every single composer really, just to gain some insight into your world. The last few months for everybody have been a very strange time, and everybody has dealt with it differently. I just wondered how the last few months have affected you personally and as a composer.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question in the light of these last months of lockdown and restricted access to anything we enjoy. On a personal level, it's been a little challenging as I've had to keep my 101-year-old mother and her carer supplied with food and stuff. At the start of lockdown, I was always expecting to be stopped on my long drive over to my mother's, and I often saw 3 or 4 cars on my 20-mile journey. That was the upside of lockdown. But several people have said to me, surely, as a composer, it must be easy just to shut oneself away and get on with writing. But, in fact, I haven't found it easy. For the first 6 weeks, it was difficult to concentrate and just keep focused. I took some comfort when I heard 2 different authors being asked the same question on the radio, and they both said something similar to the way I've been feeling. They agreed that writing is a solitary business, but then we're used to having a healthy world around us, one in which we can find contrast to our isolation by going out, meeting friends, going to concerts, art galleries, travelling, all the stuff we enjoy. And I have found this lack of balance really disconcerting, because I do feel contrast really helps inspire and motivate. But then, of course, the day of dawning always happens, and the realisation there is work to be done, and one just has to get on with it and do it, which is how things are now. I write a lot of choral music, and it's just so dispiriting that so much has been shut down. But I must say I am full of admiration for artists and performers like you and Gavin, who find other ways in which to engage with us culturally starved people.
Well, you're very welcome. We're certainly trying our best, but I think, you know, what we're doing is also responding in the best way that we can, trying to find motivation and inspiration from somewhere, because I'd say, like you, I've certainly found it quite difficult to find that creativity to have it come naturally, I think, when, as you say, it's, everything is kind of muted, everything's been sort of restricted, and the idea of it, being a healthy world, and that's what we need to be able to thrive and to be creative. I think that's a really interesting concept, and you can just take a look at the news to discover why some of us feel a little dispirited, perhaps, but that's another story. Anyway, thank you very much, Cecilia, for answering some questions and for and for letting us perform your piece, Song of the Mice. Thank you.
Sleep, sleep, my little one. My brave little mouse. You'll sleep an hour and then sleep too. In your dreams, you'll eat the mummy cat and leave the daddy cat. The daddy cat to me, to me, to me, to me, to me, to. Sleep, my troublemaker. Mama will sing you a song. Sing you a song. Oh, sweetly the chest smells of sugar, and on the floor there's a crust of bread in the corner. The crust wants to sleep. Sleep, my little Why are you jumping around like that? Don't be afraid, silly. That's a cricket chirring. Not a soul in the house, dead quiet. Don't scratch.
I'm very pleased to welcome composer Cheryl Frances-Hoad, who joins us here to talk a little bit about her piece Ante-Natal. Hi Cheryl, thank you very much for joining us. Ante-Natal comes from a song cycle you wrote in 2011 called One Life Stand. It's a fantastic collection of songs which kind of looks at all different aspects of womanhood, different moments in the life of a real woman, I guess. Can you just tell us a little bit more about it, how it came about?
This song cycle came about as a result of a chat with Jennifer Johnson, the mezzo, and Sophie Hannah, the writer. And Jen was basically sort of bemoaning the fact that the music of Frauen lieben und leben is so beautiful by Schumann, but she didn't really like singing Chamiso's words because she found them rather outdated. And so we decided to create a new song cycle about a modern woman's life and loves, using poems from, I think, Sophie's 5 books of poems. And she's written, many poems about women's lives and loves, and so there was plenty to choose from.
Yeah, it's certainly a good place to start with plenty of material, I guess. You mentioned before it was Schumann's cycle, Frauen lieben und leben. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the influence of that music. In your programme notes, in the music itself, you mention exactly how his music helped to kind of shape your cycle. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about it.
I mean, I love Schumann's song cycle, the music, Frauen lieben und leben. It's so beautiful. And when I was writing my song cycle, it was mainly the piano writing really that inspired me. So each of my songs, I think my One Life Stand has 8 songs. Many of them, the vast majority, are inspired directly by some of Schumann's piano writing. And I really tried to use that in a modern, fresh way in my song cycle. The structure of my song cycle is sort of loosely structured around his, but it just has a sort of more updated trajectory, I hope, than the Chamiso texts.
Well, the text for the cycle, it comes from pre-existing poetry written by, you mentioned her before, crime writer and poet Sophie Hannah. How did you find setting her text to music? Was it a collaborative process, or was she quite happy just to give you her texts and you do with them as you please?
I mean, so this project basically arose out of lunches that me, Jen and Sophie used to have together. And once we decided on this, Sophie literally handed over her books of poetry and she said, choose what you want and set what you want. So it was very much me taking what I liked. I think we ran through the collection of poems that I chose. I think at one point I had sort of 4 different versions. I had 4 different song cycles because Sophie had just written so many poems about this subject matter. And then it was totally down to me, and Sophie came to the concert, and I think she liked what she heard. But it was very much me. This I love collaborating, but this was not a very collaborative process, which is also wonderful sometimes.
That's very true, yeah. I guess collaboration can sometimes merely mean just trusting someone or trusting one another, and that's all you need really. But Ante-Natal itself, I find, is a very honest portrayal of more of a middle-class motherhood, I guess. The woman talks about her husband's ideas of pregnancy. She seems frustrated by his thoughts and his actions, I suppose, but there is a shift, that you get this kind of comedy, well, not comedy, but these kind of frustrated but quite comic reactions to his ideas. But then there is this shift towards the final part of the song, and I guess in the text where it came from originally. But what are your thoughts about that change, and how did you try to portray it in your music?
I guess what I wanted to portray in Ante-Natal is a sort of mixture of emotions, from humour, frustration to obvious deep maternal and paternal love. I mean, it's as simple as that, really. You know, I love the character of the mother at the beginning, but then you get that great sincerity and real warmth at the end, and I find it very, very touching to set, actually. It's all imagination, as I don't have kids, but you know, imagination is a great thing.
Oh, yes, the importance of imagination, definitely. Well, finally, we've been asking every composer this, but it has been such a strange time, I think, for everybody, and there's a sort of shifting landscape around music and performance. I just wondered, how has it affected you, if anything, as a composer?
So the last 6 months have been a really strange time. I'm personally incredibly lucky to have had work throughout, so I've been writing away. In many ways, my life has not changed. I spend 98% of my time in this position at the piano or at the desk writing, and I've been doing exactly the same thing. I mean, you know, I've written several pieces, directly as a result of the pandemic, and that's been a great honour and something very thought-provoking thing to do. I mean, most of my friends are performers, and so it's been devastating to hear what's happening to them, and I just hope things get back to normal as soon as they safely can, really. Yeah, it's a strange thing for composers.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? How the life of a composer is in fact being quite isolated, just so you've got the time to focus and to write your music. But there we are. But thank you very, very much, Cheryl, for answering our questions today, and it's been a pleasure to sing Ante-Natal, so thank you very much. If anyone's interested in checking out One Life Stand, then head to Cheryl's website. The address will be at the end of the concert, so thank you very much.
My husband doesn't want to hold the plastic pelvis model. He tells the other husbands that it's bound to be a doddle. He thinks the role of classes is to teach, not mollycoddle. He'll go so far, but not an inch beyond. My husband is afraid of meeting women called magenta, of sharing wholesome snacks outside the early learning centre, of any exercise that's an incontinence preventer. My husband listens to my fear, tells me to overcome it, changes the subject to the Davos Economic Summit, decides that if there's pain, he'll simply ask the nurse to numb it. He says he doesn't think it sounds that bad. My husband doesn't care if I'm a leader or a squatter, says pregnancy is no excuse for reading Harry Potter. He isn't keen on Stephanie or Amos or Carlotta. Leave it to him. He named our last car. On Father's Day, my husband gets a card he's not expecting. I say it's from the baby with a little redirecting. He doesn't blame my hormones or insist that I'm projecting. He tells me he's the father of a star.
The Tempest by Melinda Kallesmae. 6 floors up, the hospital window frames rage across the bay. Out I peer at lightning spears and surging greys. I cannot hear trouble outside or beyond the sound of cow. Noise won't help, the midwife mutters, and quits my stool. She disapproves of the moo which escapes, trails the corridor, and, reaching the office, insists she enter a lonely note in my hospital file. Of course, I imagine the entry and scene. Star of my act, I watch my husband, who watches, composed. I say, if it's a boy, we'll call him Prospero. He says, we know she's a girl, we agreed on Grace. I bellow and bellow again when he repeats, we agreed. I should have agreed to a different part, not the cow and not the labourer. I want to charge at the man who plays the expectant father. Instead, all fours on the bed, urgent and mooing, I struggle for Grace, who emerges. Tempest triumphant, she pumps her fists and roars.
So I'm very pleased to welcome composer Stephen McNeff, who has only just returned to London after a successful premiere of his opera Beyond the Garden in Ljubljana in Slovenia. So you can find out a little bit more about that on his website and also on Twitter. So Stephen, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Cradle song, you very kindly sent me the song about a year ago, and funnily enough it was this song that got me thinking about the theme of motherhood and this concert, obviously a long time ago now, but here we are. You mentioned that it was to be a part of a set of songs focusing on the positive side of motherhood and children. So what made you focus on that theme in particular?
Yeah, this was something I've been thinking about for some time, and actually the history of the first song, which is called Cradle Song, the text by Tennyson, I wrote some time ago, and I've, oddly enough, because you mentioned it, I did work on it in Ljubljana some years ago, because I go down there a fair bit and teach at the Academy of Music there, part of the University of Ljubljana. And I remember working on that song in an hotel room in Ljubljana in some time I'd had. I've written for women's voices for nearly all my career, and I've written a lot for mezzo, and I wanted to kind of redress that by writing some more songs for sopranos. It just happens that a lot of the women I know, sopranos I know, had young children. And it occurred to me one day, I wonder how many song cycles there are out there which actually deal with the subject that, a lot of people experience. Because people such as yourself and probably more than 50% of the other sopranos I know are mums. That would be something that there would be a very high recognition factor, and that if I chose a set that kind of covered the span of motherhood, it would appeal to a number of different kinds of sopranos. So that's how it came, and we have to be honest. There's very little out there in Schubert that deals with motherhood.
Definitely.
It's very covered, is it? And the only the sort of sets that are out there, I know it's for mezzo, but something like Mahler's Kindertotenlieder, you don't want to kind of do child death songs all the time. So
No.
it's as a parent myself, as a father, that being a parent is full of mixed emotions, peaks and troughs of joy and and challenges.
Yeah.
As we
Mm.
so something that would kind of begin to start looking at that, and something that when people like artists like yourself looked at them, the songs, you go, yep, I recognize that, I get that.
Yeah, I
You know?
think it's important, definitely. Yeah. What other songs do you hope to add to your cycle, I suppose?
Well, the Tennyson is a very lyrical
Mhm.
song. Although, as you pointed out with great insight, it's an anxious song.
Mm.
It's a hopeful song. It's somebody about somebody whose partner is away at sea, and how she and we talked about this. We kind of imagine that she is anxiously waiting,
Mm.
but we didn't want to portray her as being a helpless non-participant in that. She clearly identifies her role as, I have to do the best I can for this child in order to keep this family unit together.
Mhm. Mhm.
We assume that it comes from a community where risk and the uh, risk is always there. I mean, as it is for all of us. In her case, there is a particular risk, but I think I wanted to write something where she was not a victim,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
kind of able to approach the subject with some kind of fortitude and great ability.
Mhm.
She is singing to the child, but she's also singing to herself.
There are a couple of other songs I think you wanted to add.
Yeah. So,
So
I mean, that was the starting point. So then I
yeah,
wanted something that would be, because as I say, the Tennyson setting is lyrical for those reasons,
yeah,
because it's
yeah,
a song, both for
exactly, yeah.
herself and for the baby, for the child. So the lullaby in Fracktown,
Mhm.
which is a poem that you pointed me in this direction, and it's a great poem by an American poet called Elace Mellin Regard,
Mhm.
and it is a kind of an urban analogue of the Tennyson. It's very jagged, and it's very. I don't really like using this term loosely, but it's kind of jazzy.
Yeah.
It has sprung rhythms, um, and will be very contrasting to the Tennyson. I had actually a lively conversation with Elace. I actually wrote to her. I found her
Mm.
on Google. Everybody finds everything on Google. And wrote to her, and actually she was one of these people within a couple of hours. She'd responded to me and said, "Yeah, this is great. Go ahead."
Amazing.
I know, publishers will sort out the details, but she was very keen. And the other song is, which we hope to include, is Sylvia Plath's Morning Song.
Mhm.
And the idea is that will complete. What would you say that would be, Donna? About a 10 to 12 minute short set,
Yeah.
which I
Mm.
hope would then fit very conveniently into somebody's recital program.
Yeah. Mm.
And although the Tennyson Cradle song is not yet published, eventually the whole set will be available through my publisher's Peters edition.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Wonderful.
pre-order now.
Yes. Yes, and we'll make sure we put up the link to that as soon as it's ready. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I think Cradle Song's a really beautiful start and a really firm start to a cycle. Because as you say, it's not just your usual lullaby. There is something else, and it tempts you into wondering what else there is to come. So I think it's very encouraging. So as you say, Cradle Song uses text by Tennyson. So what drew you to that particular poem?
Well, it was the lyricism, and I mean, in fact, the poem kind of found me,
Okay.
in the sense that once you decide to do a set of when I'd been thinking about doing a set of lullabies, I looked around at lullabies and cradle songs, and of course that one popped up. And it's very settable because it's one of those poems that it suggests settings quite immediately. So I was drawn to that, and I as I do, I was kind of playing around with it at the piano, and just the idea of that kind of accompaniment, that sound world, because that's one of the important things I think in any composition process for me anyway, is finding out what kind of sound world we're in, because sometimes you can't find one.
No,
and you have to leave it. And when I'm writing opera, that happens, and you kind of, I have to say, when I'm writing opera, I kind of cherry pick in the libretto and go through and find the bits that I go, okay, no, I can hear that one.
Yeah.
And it's like doing a crossword puzzle. You then go back and work on the hard clues later.
Yeah.
You hope that something else might have kind of go, oh, right, yeah.
Okay, now I've got it. Yeah.
I like that. Didn't present those kind of problems. It just happened. It was with the Tennyson. It was more a case of, right, how long should this be, and should we move it along a little bit? But it was a very appealing sound world.
Yeah. I think that brings me on nicely to my next question. It was about your process of setting text to music, but particularly when it's text by a deceased poet, because a few of the composers we've had on before have written text in a collaboration with a living poet or lyricist. But do you ever feel stuck when it's when you perhaps don't have the freedom to change things when it's by a deceased poet, or actually does that help a bit because you don't have someone trying to influence the way you write something? I suppose they're two different processes, aren't they? But
I suppose I do 50-50 anyway. With someone like Tennyson, who is, shall we say, canonic, you cannot change Tennyson, and you have to make sure the punctuation's right and all of that. So in one sense, it's a no option thing. If you decide to do to set a work by a deceased poet, it's your responsibility to respect what they wanted. Otherwise, don't do it. You can't kind of approach it as if you were making a Hollywood movie where you change the plot and all the rest of it to suit the circumstances. Working with living poets, and I do that a lot, and I've most recently been working a lot with the wonderful Irish poet Aoife Mannix, and perhaps we can link Aoife on the website as well, because she really is a tremendous poet. And the joy of working with Aoife is that she's very confident and very flexible, and we talk a lot about what it is we're aiming for. She's written a number of important texts for me, actually, and she wrote the libretto for Beyond the Garden, but she's also written the texts for me for what are effectively song cycles. The song cycle I did for, or the choral song cycle I did for Chamber Choir Ireland back in 2016, A Half Darkness. What Aoife and I do actually is we tend to go on road trips, so as a way of discussing the idea and also capturing what it is. Yeah, I know.
That's lovely. It's a really nice idea.
Well, it means we get great photos as well. With Half Darkness, we went to the west of Ireland because it was about the Irish revolutionary Patrick Pearse, who was part of the 1916 Easter uprising and was executed by the British. But Pearse, as well as being an Irish nationalist, he was a teacher and an Irish speaker. So we went way out to Galway and just explored the world that he'd been in. And similarly with Beyond the Garden, we went, because Beyond the Garden is very, very loosely based on the relationship between Alma Mahler and her daughter Manon. But we went to the place in Venice, the house in Venice where Alma Mahler had lived,
Wow.
and where they were that Easter with her daughter Manon, who started showing symptoms of the polio that eventually killed her,
Mm.
killed Manon. And unusually in Venice, it was a house with a garden, and we noticed it's now an hotel, a beautiful hotel, boutique hotel. When we went there, the place is called Oltre il Giardino,
Oh,
which means beyond the garden.
beyond the garden, yeah. Oh.
We looked at each other standing outside the wonderful green door, and we went, that's the title, isn't it? So that stuck. So collaborative in that sense, that we both know what it is we want to write about. And then Aoife writes very quickly, and then says in a wonderfully flexible way, okay, over to you. So I went back to her, and I used to be very, very fastidious about doing this. If I changed things, I would say, do you mind if I kind of change this to that? But we came to trust each other, and she now says, look, just send me the whole thing when you're done with it, and let me have a look. And, I trust you, because you've got to do with it what you've got to do with it. But that was an experience I'd had very early on. I worked a lot with the sadly no longer with us, the poet Charles Causley. Many people will remember from studying his poems at school. And Charles used to say, I won't even try and imitate his Cornish accent, you're the boy that's got to set it to music. You need to do what you need to do with it. I mean, he was talking about theatre text, particularly. I wouldn't amend his poetry at all. But so it's that kind of relationship I have with writers is a fluid one. And I think working with finding a good living writer to work with is very hard. When you find one, and I know other composers feel this about their librettists, you hang on to them like they were your very best friend, and they become good friends. But you don't tell other people about them.
No. You don't want them to take them, no. They're mine now.
You should let other work comes their way. That's great, but yeah, that's the relationship I have with the writer.
That's fantastic. So going back to Cradle Song, so this song has traditional piano accompaniment, as most sort of songs do, traditional songs. Would you ever consider using anything else, either instead or in addition, if you were developing it further, or is it kind of piano is sort of where you sit on it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, isn't it? That's the kind of the Mahler Strauss thing of, do you take it and do you, how would you do it? Would I do it for big orchestra? I mean, I think if you were to come along to me and say, look, I'm doing this festival and they have an ensemble and they're interested in seeing what would happen, could we do this? I did this with them. I can't remember whether you heard it, my short one-woman opera Vivienne, which I wrote with Mezzo Claire McCaldin, which she recorded actually with Libby Burgess. But Claire came to me and said, look, I'm doing this these events with the Berkeley Ensemble at their festival, the Little Venice Festival. And yes, of course, Claire from Prestine. Would you be interested in rewriting Vivienne for, I think it was violin, clarinet, cello, and piano? And I did, and it works. I suppose, Donna, the answer to your question is, make me an offer.
This is interesting. Yeah. With Cradle Song, I think it works beautifully in its subtlety with just the piano accompaniment, but there is something, I think it's the lyrical nature of it, that it does feel like it could be more expansive with other instrumentation, but it's, who knows, eh?
You could hear it with an orchestra, creating a different kind of sound world. You could hear it with the chamber ensemble. I mean, I wouldn't hear swirling harps. Quite austere around it. So, let's see how it works with the piano first, and get some performance history there.
Yeah.
But in principle, I'm always very pragmatic about these things. I don't have a problem with things existing in various formats.
That's
You know,
good.
composers never used to have any kind of trouble with all of that. That was just like, that's what happened.
Yeah.
If you need it for this combination for that concert, but you need it for a different combination for another concert, that's absolutely fine.
That's lovely. It's interesting. It's good that there's that flexibility there. I think, yeah, it's important. But so very finally, my last question, it's kind of something that I've been asking everybody really, just because of the time that we're living in and because of the format of this. And so the last few months, as you know, have been highly unusual for everyone. But how has it affected you as a composer? Do you feel that you've still had space to be, have you had space to be more creative, or have you actually found it quite difficult to find motivations of being kind of locked in, I suppose?
I think I'm luckier than most. The space you see here, I spend a lot of time anyway. So in that sense, very little has changed. I can spend 12 or 14 hours a day here. You can't see it all on video, but it's a nice space. I have a lot of daylight. And it's at the top of the house. So that's not been at all bad. My Guildhall teaching, we all went online, and actually teaching composition online worked extremely well. Clearly that doesn't work quite so well if you're studying opera, but we actually managed to do that. And Guildhall, we came up with some very, very inventive solutions for the Opera Makers program at Guildhall. For me, it meant the restriction was not being able to travel. Beyond the Garden was originally scheduled for June in Ljubljana. So luckily they got some dates last week, which was fantastic. Normally I would spend time in Italy during the summer. I have a little place in Italy which I go to as often as I can, but we haven't been there since January, because shortly after I came back last time, all hell broke loose in Italy, got hit very hard. So it has been that, but I consider myself, in contrast to my many performer friends like yourself and other singers and instrumentalists, I really can't complain, because I know how hard it's been for performers. And the loss of income has been a big effect on you. But like a lot of people have said, I just miss playing. I miss singing. I just actually miss the physicality of it. And full marks to you for getting on and arranging something like this. I think it's been incredibly inventive of you to do this, and to keep that relationship going with living music. And as we hopefully ease out of it a bit, or at least find ways of negotiating it, we can build on that. But so yeah, I'd have to say I really can't complain. How it's going to impact later, because I think what's happening with composers is that because so much has been cancelled this year, festivals and so on, there's going to be a knock-on effect of all the commissions that should have happened this year will be happening next year. So the commissions that were kind of being lined up for next year are all being it's being pushed forward. It's like it's like a shunting operation. Everything is done. So we'll have to see what happens there. But at the moment, I have a number of projects that I want to be getting on with and can get on with, and we'll hopefully, things like Beyond the Garden will come to this country next year. I'm going to push on and write the rest of the songs for you.
Thank you.
And then we'll hopefully next year, hopefully next year we'll have the opportunity to do a proper live premiere.
Yes, that would be lovely.
And you're going to have a lot of rep to get through, Donna.
I know, yes, absolutely.
You're going to book the South Bank for a few nights.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, full marks to you for doing it and pushing on with it. It's great, and it's inspiring for the composers to know that there are, singers, performers out there who actually could care about it and want to keep all that going. So thank you.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome, and thank you so much for being involved in this and agreeing to talk to me today, and to and for letting me sing your beautiful music. So, thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is just a final word from Donna and me, Gavin Roberts, to thank you all for being with us at this second edition of Songs and Sounds. Thank you to all our wonderful composers, Cheryl Frances-Hoad, Cecilia McDowall and Stephen McNeff for being involved and for sharing their wonderful music with us and giving us their fascinating personal insights into their music and their work. Please do join us again for the next edition of Songs and Sounds, and you'll find out about that if you subscribe to our Facebook channel or our YouTube channel. Thank you very much.